welcome back to Red Flags and Body Bags. I'm Dana.
And I'm Chloe.
And today we're covering the story of Ellen Greenberg. I couldn't stop thinking about this case from the moment I first heard it. 20 stab wounds, a locked apartment, and somehow it was ruled a suicide. Just imagining that scene sends chills down my spine. Ellen Greenberg was only 27, a beloved first grade teacher with a life full of promise ahead of her. How could something so horrific happen to someone like her? And how on earth did anyone conclude that she did this to herself? I have so many questions, and over the next hour, I want to take you with me as we dig into Ellen's story. A story that's equal parts heartbreaking and baffling. Let's sift through the evidence, the theories, and the emotional turmoil of a case that has haunted Ellen's family for nearly 15 years. I warn you, it's a roller coaster. There will be moments that will make you angry at the injustice, moments that will break your heart for Ellen and her parents, and sometimes that feel straight out of a detective novel. The kind with locked room mysteries that seem impossible to solve. I'm just someone obsessed with getting to the truth of what happened to Ellen, and trust me, by the end of this, you'll be as obsessed as I am. Because the Ellen Greenberg case is unlike any other. It's one of those cases that burrow into your mind and won't let go. So get comfortable, or as comfortable as you can, for a story like this. Dim the lights, maybe grab a cup of tea, and let's step into Ellen's world for a bit. Let's start not with her death, but with her life, because Ellen Greenberg was so much more than just a true crime case. She was a daughter, a fiancé, a teacher, and a friend. And to really feel the impact of what happened, we need to know who she was before that fateful night. So, who was Ellen Greenberg? Ellen Ray Greenberg was born June 23rd, 1983, an only child to Joshua and Sandy Greenberg. Her early life was filled with love. Her parents absolutely adored her. She grew up in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, where she was known as the girl with a bright smile and a heart for others. All of her friends described her as joyful, fun-loving, the kind of person who could light up a room. She had big dreams, too. After high school, Ellen went to Penn State University, then moved to Philadelphia for graduate school. By her mid-20s, she had earned her master's and found her calling as a first-grade teacher at Juniata Park Academy in Philly. If you've ever met someone who teaches little kids, you know the kind of heart and patience that takes. That was Ellen, patient, caring, and full of life, and all of her students loved her. In Philadelphia, Ellen also found something else, something that she had been searching for. She found love. She began dating a guy named Sam Goldberg, who worked as a TV producer for NBC Sports. Sam was outgoing, handsome, and seemed crazy about Ellen. After a couple of years, they got engaged and started planning a wedding. By January 2011, Ellen was deep into wedding prep. She'd sent out save the date cards for their upcoming marriage. You can imagine how excited she was. Talking about venues, dresses, the future. Ellen had everything to live for, as Sam himself would say later. But like many people, Ellen also had her struggles. She had been dealing with anxiety, even some bouts of depression. In the months leading up to 2011, she was reportedly on medication for it and seeing a therapist. Still, those close to her would say she was managing. She was doing all the right things to handle her stress, and she was not the type to just give up. Her mom, Sandy, would later say that Ellen had never expressed any suicidal thoughts. She was planning for her future, not dreaming of ending things. In fact, the very day before her death, Ellen had been emailing caterers about the wedding. That doesn't sound like someone preparing to die, does it? Knowing all this about Ellen, her joyfulness, her love for her students and family, her excitement and normal jitters about the wedding, makes what happened next so much harder to comprehend. Because on a cold winter day in 2011, everything changed. So, January 26, 2011. It was a Wednesday, and a blizzard was hitting Philadelphia. Snow days are usually every teacher's secret wish come true. A surprise day off. That afternoon, as the storm got worse, Ellen's school dismissed early. She drove back to the apartment she shared with Sam in the Manayunk neighborhood of Philly. The building was called Venice Lofts, a nice modern apartment complex. With the snow piling up outside, Ellen settled in at home. We know she changed into comfy clothes, sweatpants and a t-shirt, and it looked like she started making herself a fruit salad in the kitchen. Maybe she was planning to curl up with a snack and watch some TV or grade papers. We'll never know for sure. At around 4:45 p.m., Sam decided to go to the gym located in their apartment complex. According to his account, he left Ellen in the apartment, maybe chopping up fruit, and headed out for a quick workout. Nothing unusual. He said, "I'll be back soon," and she said, "Okay." It was the last conversation they ever had. Roughly 40 minutes later, sometime after 5:15 p.m., Sam came back from the gym to the sixth-floor apartment he shared with Ellen. He was sweaty from his workout, probably thinking about a hot shower or what to have for dinner. But when he put his key in the door, he realized the swing bar latch was engaged from the inside. You know those little, flip latch locks some apartments have, like a hotel room? That was latched, meaning the door would only open a few inches. Sam couldn't get in. Immediately, he started knocking and calling for Ellen, but there was no answer. Maybe she was in the shower and couldn't hear him, he thought. He tried calling her cell phone. It would have rung right inside the apartment, but still no response. According to Sam, he began to panic. Why wasn't Ellen coming to the door? She had been fine when he left. Was she okay in there? Minutes ticked by. Sam phoned his own uncle more than once and also called building security for help. When a security guard didn't immediately come, Sam took matters into his own hands. Using his weight and strength, he broke through the door, snapping that latch open. The door jamb splintered and he rushed inside the apartment, terrified of what he might find. The apartment was quiet, except for the TV, which was still on. Nothing looked disturbed in the living room. Then Sam reached the kitchen, and he found Ellen on the floor. She was collapsed up against the lower cabinets, sitting on the floor with her legs out in front of her. There was blood, a lot of blood. It covered her clothing and had pooled onto the kitchen floor. Sam ran into her, shouting her name. Ellen didn't respond. She was still, her dark hair matted with blood. And there, protruding from her chest, was the handle of a knife. Sam later told investigators that at first, in his shock, he hadn't even noticed the knife. He said he tried to lift Ellen up, saw that she wasn't breathing, and that's when he realized the large kitchen knife was actually sticking out of her chest. In a frenzy, Sam called 911 at 6:30 p.m. The call is agonizing to listen to. He's frantic, practically screaming to the dispatcher that his fiancé is bleeding and she may have fallen on a knife. I don't know, she stabbed herself. Can you imagine? You find the person you love like that and you're trying to make sense of a nightmare. The dispatcher told him to start CPR if he could. Sam later said that when he tried to do chest compressions, the knife hilt made it impossible. It was lodged deep in Ellen's chest. First responders arrived within minutes. Paramedics and police rushed in, navigating around the snow that was still dumping outside. They found Sam distraught, and Ellen was beyond saving. At 6:40 p.m., Ellen Greenberg was pronounced dead on the kitchen floor of her own apartment. The crime scene, if it even was a crime scene, was puzzling from the start. No signs of an intruder, no obvious signs of a struggle in the apartment, nothing stolen. The only damage was the door Sam had busted open himself. Ellen had a knife in her chest, and later it would be confirmed that knife was one from her own kitchen. It almost looked like what Sam had assumed in his hysteria, a suicide, a messy, confusing suicide. But as the night went on and investigators began taking in the whole picture, something didn't add up at all. When the medical examiner eventually counted Ellen's wounds, everyone was in for a shock. Ellen hadn't just been stabbed once. She had been stabbed 20 times. Let that sink in. 20 knife wounds. And get this, 10 of those stab wounds were to the back of her neck and head. How on earth could anyone do that to themselves? The paramedics and police at the scene didn't know those details yet, not until the autopsy, but something already felt off that night. Unfortunately, the way this scene was handled in those early hours would create controversy for years to come. At this point, we have a young woman dead in her kitchen, a distraught fiancé who says the door was locked from the inside, and a knife sticking out of her chest. The snow is falling outside, the apartment is eerily quiet, and police are scratching their heads. What just happened here? Was this truly a suicide, or was it something far more sinister, made to look like a suicide? As we'll see, this was only the beginning of one of the strangest cases Philadelphia has ever seen.
You're going to tell me that, first off, you didn't see the knife sticking out of her chest?
So that's what he claims. He claims that he was kind of in a frenzy when he came in and he saw her there and he was trying to help her and he didn't notice the knife until he went to do CPR.
I mean, that's interesting because that's a pretty big knife handle.
Yeah, that's what some would say.
Also, 20, stab wounds. How would they rule that a suicide? On scene?
So, basically what the police are claiming is that based on the scene and what he said and what they could see initially, that's why they came to that conclusion. So he told them the door was locked from the inside. He told them that he had to bust in, and he told them that she had, obviously they all could see this knife protruding from her chest. So they're assuming that the scene is what it looks like.
Yeah.
They didn't know that she had 20 stab wounds and that some of them were to the back of her head and neck until after the autopsy was done, weeks later. So initially on scene, they're taking his word for it, I guess, and they're listening to what he says and what it looks like.
I mean, fair on that part. But after seeing those, it's pretty bizarre. Sounds crazy. Sounds very sus.
It's super sus to think that someone would stab themselves 20 times and some in the back of the head.
While she's making a snack.
While she's in the middle of making fruit salad to enjoy the rest of her day.
That doesn't make sense to me. But keep going. I'm interested. I'm intrigued.
All right. So we are at the point where we're going to talk about the locked room mystery in real life. Before we continue, though, with Ellen's story, I have to pause and tell you, this case really started to feel like a classic locked room mystery. Those detective stories where someone is murdered under impossible circumstances, like behind a locked door from the inside. It's the kind of plot Agatha Christie or Sir Arthur Conan Doyle loved to use. And here it was in real life. Ellen, dead in a latched apartment, no obvious way for a killer to get in or out. It turns out there are real cases like this that puzzle investigators for decades. One famous example is the case of Isidore Fink back in 1929, often cited as the original locked room murder mystery. Isidore Fink was a laundryman in New York City who was found shot to death in his apartment. But wait until you hear the details. His apartment was bolted shut from the inside. Police had to send a small boy through a transom window to even enter the room. Inside, they found Fink's lifeless body on the floor with 2 bullet wounds in his chest and 1 in his left wrist. There was no gun found anywhere, so it wasn't a suicide. And get this, no one else's fingerprints were in the apartment, only Fink's. The doors and windows were locked. No sign of forced entry, much like Ellen's case. And the New York Police Commissioner at the time called it an insolvable mystery. And indeed, to this day, nobody can explain how Isidore Fink was murdered. Investigators theorized all kinds of wild possibilities. A killer who squeezed through a tiny window, or someone shooting through the transom. But none of it fit the evidence. Fink's case went down in history as one of those creepy, unsolved puzzles. I mentioned this because walking into Ellen's apartment that night must have felt just as surreal for the officers. A locked room scenario isn't something they'd normally encounter outside. Initially, they might have thought if the door was truly locked from the inside and no one else was there, then who else could have stabbed Ellen? The uncomfortable answer the scene seemed to suggest was that Ellen did this to herself. As unbelievable as that sounds, the police leaned towards that conclusion right away. Sometimes the simplest explanation is the one people grasp at, even if the facts are screaming something else. But hold on, because we're about to discuss how the facts in Ellen's case would soon start screaming murder. And once those screams started, they would only get louder. When Philadelphia police and medics found Ellen's body, they made a fateful call. They treated the apartment as a suicide scene, not a homicide. And that decision had immediate consequences. For one, they didn't call the crime scene unit that would normally scour for fingerprints, DNA, and other evidence. It's hard to believe, but the authorities basically saw the knife in Ellen's chest, heard Sam's account of a locked door and her emotional struggles, and thought, case closed, it must be a suicide. They even left a lot of things untouched. Let's put ourselves in their shoes for a second. It's a chaotic snowstorm night, the fiancé is hysterical, and indeed, there are no signs of a break-in. They likely learned from Sam, or perhaps from calling around, that Ellen had anxiety, was on medication, maybe wasn't in the best mental state. One police source later claimed Ellen's own computer showed searches for suicide, though that would later be hotly disputed. In any event, the police at the scene were not seeing a typical murder scenario. Sadly, this meant they might have had a bit of tunnel vision from the start. The next morning, January 27th, 2011, Ellen's body was examined by the Philadelphia Medical Examiner's Office. The pathologist who performed her autopsy was Dr. Marlon Osborne. Now, Dr. Osborne was a professional, and when he looked at Ellen's injuries up close, his initial reaction was completely opposite to the police. In his first autopsy report, Dr. Osborne wrote that Ellen's death was caused by homicide. That's right, homicide. Stating that she had been stabbed by another person. This wasn't just a hunch, it was a medical assessment. With 20 stab wounds, including a bunch in the back of the head and neck, who could blame him for thinking this was murder? It's hard to imagine suicide by stabbing, period, let alone stabbing yourself in the back of the skull multiple times.
So, again, how is this man not being a suspect? How is Sam Goldberg not a suspect at this point?
They actually never considered him a suspect.
That's wild.
They never considered him a suspect, and immediately Dr. Osborne let police know what he thought of her body and the assessment of her wounds, and they still never considered him a suspect.
But what's interesting, though, is the police that arrived on scene, it's interesting in this story that they didn't consider him a suspect at all. Like, they automatically just believed it. And that's what's kind of weird, because in a lot of cases, they don't just believe the spouse. Mm-hmm. Especially when it looks shady. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Even though the lock or whatever, but, like, it just seems very shady.
I think maybe, and a lot of people have speculated, that latch being closed like that was the nail in the coffin, so to speak. Like, that was the thing that police were like, okay, she had to, like, all the pieces fit. She had to have done this to herself because the door was latched. But they're going off of something that he told them. Yeah. Which is why so many people are disputing that now and are bringing things up like it's pretty obvious.
I don't know a lot about, like, how people commit suicide, like, but I don't know if that's a thing that they do, like they can make themselves a snack or make themselves lunch and be like, okay, it's time. You know what I mean? I don't know.
And we talked about this too in the Sean Doherty case, like, if he were planning to do this thing, and thinking about it in his mind, he's not going to exert the extra energy to go make a snack first.
And then also, let's go back to, like, where they were saying anxiety was a thing. Like, do you know how many people, like, in the States are on anti-anxiety medications just because of the world we live in? Like, doesn't make them...
True.
You know what I mean? Like,
and I think now it's a little bit more common. Maybe back then it was a little bit more taboo than,
Yeah, or like, definitely. Because that definitely should never jump straight to that and be like, oh, yeah, that's why. You know what I mean? So...
I think a lot of people have mentioned that, too, that, like, maybe they were looking at it through that lens of... Mm-hmm. The stigma of mental health back then, that long ago. So
there could be other reasons she was fighting anxiety.
There could be. And we now know that, like, having unresolved domestic disputes, or, different things in your life can cause you to have those same symptoms. And so maybe the time, maybe the year that it was affected that too.
For sure.
Okay, so this is where things take a strange turn. Dr. Osborne changed his conclusion shortly after. According to later court documents and his testimony, he had a meeting with Philadelphia police detectives and perhaps the assistant district attorney on the case behind closed doors. In that meeting, the investigators apparently shared details from the scene with the medical examiner, notably that there was no evidence of forced entry and no defensive wounds on Ellen's arms, nothing that clearly screamed intruder or assault beyond the injuries themselves. They also likely mentioned the locked door scenario and whatever they learned about Ellen's mental health. After this meeting, Dr. Osborne made a stunning reversal. He changed Ellen's manner of death from homicide to suicide, issuing an amended death certificate stating she died by her own hand. Think about that. Within perhaps 24 to 48 hours, Ellen's case went from a suspected murder to officially a suicide. This change meant the case would be closed by police, with no criminal investigation into who might have stabbed her. It's almost like the system shrugged and said, well, mystery solved, and moved on. But the mystery was not solved, far from it. In fact, the way things were handled right after that decision created even more controversy. Since it was just a suicide, on January 27th, the apartment was professionally cleaned, scrubbed down, all the blood wiped away, any potential forensic evidence on surfaces and objects pretty much gone. Even more alarming, one of Sam Goldberg's relatives, his uncle, a man named James Schwartzman, was allowed to enter the apartment that day and remove personal items. He took Ellen's laptop and phone, as well as some of Sam's belongings. This was done with police permission. It blows my mind that they let anyone walk out with the victim's computer and phone before a full investigation. But that's what happened. By the time detectives thought, maybe we should search those devices, the chain of custody was broken. The uncle did turn them over when asked later, but at that point, who knows if anything was accessed or altered during that window. I'm not implying that he did tamper. We have no evidence of that. But even the appearance of a compromised investigation is bad.
So, you mean to tell me that they let him in? They're not even married at this point.
Correct.
So, I don't feel like that was okay to do. You know what I'm saying? Like, they're assuming that they were just so happy-go-lucky, and even at that point, they're not even married, so you would think that it would, her parents would have that right to go in there.
Correct.
You know?
There were so many assumptions made, it seems like. But also, like, a question that I had was, when he went in to get personal items, why did he get hers? Why, if he was going in to get personal items for Sam, like to have clothes to change or whatever, that's one thing, but why are you going after her phone and computer?
Was there a big concern of something on the phone or the computer that, you know, that's very interesting to me that they even allowed someone that was not, especially then, it seems like you would have to be married to have that right.
So many things that happened early on in this whole case really caused an issue for things later on and for the true story to be told, and it's just really hard to even like read or look at because it's so sad.
Yeah, it is very sad.
But those early decisions, like not treating it as a crime scene, cleaning up, letting him remove her stuff, that would later fuel the Greenberg family's fury, as it should. It's like crucial pieces of the puzzle were wiped away before anyone realized that there was even a puzzle. The official word by February 2011 was that Ellen Greenberg died by suicide. Case closed. But Ellen's parents were in absolute disbelief when they heard that ruling. Josh and Sandy Greenberg had gotten the awful news that their child was gone. That alone is unimaginable pain. But then to be told she took her own life, they could not accept it, not with the sheer violence and strange circumstances of her death. And they weren't alone. Friends, other relatives, even many experts who later looked at the case, all were like, no, this does not make sense as a suicide. So if it wasn't suicide, what was it? Let's go through the evidence. The autopsy findings and forensic clues that the authorities seemingly brushed aside. Because once you see what Ellen actually endured, you might start to question the suicide ruling as well. I know I did. Now we're going to talk about the autopsy, the revelations that came from the autopsy, and the brutal truth. I do want to insert a trigger warning right here because we are discussing in detail some of the injuries that Ellen had, where they were, and any type of distance within her body that they might have gone. So if those are things that might trigger you, I just wanted to warn you before I go into that. Ellen's autopsy revealed a nightmarish array of injuries. We've mentioned the 20 stab wounds, but let's break it down just a little bit more because the details are important. 2 of the stab wounds were particularly deep. One went 3 inches into her chest, piercing her heart. Another went through her stomach. Those were likely the fatal wounds. Then there were 10 wounds to the back of her neck and head. Yes, the back. Some of those were more like punctures or lesser penetrations, but a few were substantial. Imagine trying to stab yourself in the back of your own neck. How would you even do that multiple times? Ellen also had wounds to her scalp and a gash on her forehead. It was as if someone had attacked her from behind and above. There were stab cuts on her scalp that went through to her skull, and even one that nicked the bone of her spinal column. The medical examiner initially thought one of the neck wounds might have actually penetrated into her brain, which would have caused immediate severe dysfunction, meaning she couldn't have continued stabbing herself after that. However, oddly, the autopsy report mentioned that a consulting neuropathologist found no evidence of a brain injury. Years later, that neuropathologist, Dr. Lucy Rourke Adams, said she had no recollection of ever being asked to examine Ellen's brain.
What?
And she found no record of it. She sifted through her records and was not able to confirm that that had ever happened.
That's sus.
Very sus. It's a weird discrepancy that we might get into later. It suggests possible miscommunication or worse, but I'll leave that aside for now. In addition to stab wounds, Ellen had 11 bruises all over her body in different stages of healing. Bruises were found on her right arm, right leg, and abdomen. Different stages of healing means they didn't all occur at the same time. Some were newer, some were older. To Ellen's parents, those bruises were a red flag for possible domestic abuse. Like she might have been getting physically hurt over a period of weeks or months. In fact, experts have pointed out that the pattern of bruising, including bruising on her neck and wrist, could indicate someone grabbing her or choking her in the days or weeks before she died.
No way. So, did anyone ever report that there was any, that they witnessed anything like that between them two?
There was no report of domestic violence, and from what everyone could see from the outside, everything looked picture perfect, but what we know about domestic violence is that oftentimes it does.
So he could have been abusing her behind the scenes and no one even knew.
No one would have known. And she was planning a wedding that she was excited about, and she was truly happy to have found love or to have that. She wanted that. She had told her friends, for years that that's what she wanted.
Yeah.
So she was truly excited about that chapter of her life. And I think that, in domestic violence situations that we know of, often clouds what's happening behind closed doors.
And she was the only child to the Greenbergs, right?
Yes.
So she could have had a lot of pressure on her, being the one to get the only child to bring them a grandchild or something like that, you know what I mean? So she probably had a lot of pressure on her and didn't want to be a failure.
And not of anyone's fault, just things that you feel you're supposed to do or supposed to be. So yeah, there are a lot of things that could have swept that under the rug.
Well, that's very heartbreaking because, especially for parents to even feel that could be a domestic abuse situation on top of not receiving justice at this point, for their own daughter.
Right.
That's devastating.
I can't imagine going this many years without knowing what truly happened to my child.
Yeah, that's devastating.
But yeah, so the experts say that someone could have been grabbing her, choking her in the days or weeks before she died. One forensic pathologist, Dr. Joseph Scott Morgan, he noted that some marks on her neck and wrist look like textbook strangulation marks. And I've looked at them myself, and I would have to agree. Strangulation, that's something you'd obviously never find in a suicide. There was also a 2-inch bruise on her right hip and a deep bruise on her scalp under the hair, possibly from blunt force trauma, like being hit or slammed against something. None of these injuries by themselves killed her, but they do paint a disturbing picture of what might have been happening in her life leading up to the incident.
And you said she was a teacher, right?
Yes.
So even, if you think about, being around little kids all day, of course they can, grab your arm, hold on to you and pull you this way, pull you that way, but that could never explain the bruising around the neck.
Not the neck or the scalp or her hips. I've seen reports where some people have looked at photos of her, and you can see that, throughout her life, she likes to wear things that, show her arms, and she likes to wear dresses and spaghetti straps and things like that. But in the last 2 to 3 months before this happened, now it was cold outside, it was winter, it was snowy, but she was definitely wearing things that were covering her full body. So no one would have even seen those wounds.
So it's almost like if the abuse was happening, it could have started recently or got worse recently.
Yeah, for sure.
That's okay.
Now, one of the biggest questions, if Ellen was murdered, who did it? The obvious person under the microscope is the fiancé, Sam, since he was the only other person known to be around that day. To be clear, Sam Goldberg has never been charged in connection with Ellen's death. Police interviewed him, and by all public accounts did not find blood on him or signs of a struggle on his body. Sam's story was that he was at the gym when it happened, and phone and gym records more or less back up that he was out of the apartment for some period. He says he came back, door was latched. However, over the years, several inconsistencies and curiosities have been pointed out that cast doubt on Sam's account. The locked door. Initially, everyone thought the door was truly locked from the inside by Ellen, but the building manager later testified that the swing bar latch might not have been fully in place, meaning it's possible to pull the door shut with the latch hanging and it might catch, or someone could manipulate it. In other words, the latch didn't guarantee Ellen locked it herself. Furthermore, Sam claimed a security guard was with him when he broke down the door, but the security guard said he actually was not present at the moment. Elevator surveillance footage showed Sam riding up alone shortly before the 911 call. So the door could have been latched by someone else or even latched accidentally. That locked room element that he added might have been a red herring. The timeline and phone calls. Sam called his own parents or relatives during the period he was trying to get into the apartment. He called his uncle, who is a defense attorney, as well.
Wait, now, his uncle, is that the same guy that you said that came into the apartment and got the laptop and the phone?
Correct. The same uncle that entered the apartment and removed Ellen's phone and computer.
Very interesting. And he's a defense attorney.
Attorney.
This is getting juicy.
Yes. 2 of his relatives initially said they were on the phone with him as he was breaking the door down also, but phone records later didn't support those exact claims, suggesting some misremembering or misstatements. These are small details, but they matter when you're scrutinizing an alibi or a sequence of events. It's not that they prove wrongdoing, but they add to a sense that things were chaotic and perhaps not exactly as they were first described. There was also possible staging. One detective noted that Ellen's body was found sitting upright against cabinets, which is not a typical posture for someone who collapsed mid-suicide. Could someone have propped her up or moved her? There's an unsettling detail. One of the stab wounds, one of the back of the neck wounds, showed no hemorrhaging, which forensic experts say could mean Ellen's heart had stopped before that wound was inflicted. In other words, she might have been already dead when at least one of the stab wounds was delivered. If true, that would obviously indicate a homicide, since people don't stab themselves after they've died. It also raises the possibility of overkill or staging, like an attacker inflicted extra wounds either in a frenzy or to try to make it look like Ellen did it to herself.
So just like during the Idaho 4, when we covered that case and, really did a deep dive in that, was like, all we kept thinking about was like, anybody that's going to stab somebody like that is definitely a crime of passion.
Yes.
Right? Like, it's very, that is an intense way to go and to take somebody out. So it's almost like a bunch of rage was behind that.
I mean, looking at the psychology behind it, like all psychologists would say that stabbing is something personal. It is usually out of rage. So the fact that there are 20 stab wounds and the fact that that is the way that she died definitely doesn't point towards suicide or something that someone did to themselves at all.
And especially if that was if there was one post-mortem.
Correct.
That's somebody who's really freaking pissed.
That's a detail that, for me, is haunting. To think that that one could be a post-mortem wound.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the knife. The knife in Ellen's chest was plunged in up to the hilt. For context, it was a large serrated kitchen knife about 10 inches long. If Ellen had somehow done that to herself at the end, it would have taken a tremendous amount of force to drive it in that deep. One retired medical examiner, Dr. Michelle Dupree, said she physically tried to imagine and simulate how a person could stab themselves in the back of the neck and in the chest like in Ellen's case, and she found it physically, anatomically impossible to self-inflict all those wounds in that manner. No matter how she angled her arm, it just defied the mechanics of the human body. And she's done countless suicide investigations with knives. She said she's never seen someone stab themselves in the back repeatedly. Suicidal stabbers usually go for the chest or stomach or even the throat, not the back of the neck. All of these factors scream this was a homicide, right? At least that's what a lot of independent experts started saying. Dr. Cyril Wecht, a very prominent forensic pathologist, famously for challenging the JFK assassination single bullet theory, also reviewed Ellen's case and said it was strongly suspicious of homicide, and that he didn't understand how it was written off as a suicide. Dr. Henry Lee, another renowned forensic scientist, you might know him from the O.J. Simpson trial. He also looked at the crime scene photos and autopsy and concluded that the blood patterns and the number of wounds were consistent with a homicide. Basically, it looked to him like someone else was involved. The Greenbergs also hired a local forensic pathologist, Dr. Wayne Ross, who found evidence that one of the stab wounds penetrated Ellen's cranial cavity, the lower part of her brain, and would have caused such severe pain and nerve damage that he doubted she could not have continued stabbing herself after that. He also noted a nick on her thyroid gland and some of the bruising as signs of strangulation attempts. In Dr. Ross's opinion, Ellen's death was a clear homicide and possibly involved manual strangulation plus stabbing, a sign of a very personal, rage-filled attack. So if we list it out plainly, the inconsistencies and red flags in Ellen's case include extreme number of wounds, 20, and many in positions and locations that would be hard to do to yourself. A knife plunged into her chest so hard that it required a lot of force, and Ellen was a small girl. Multiple bruises predating the incident, hinting at prior assaults. Possible strangulation marks on her neck and wrists. At least one wound made after death. The locked door scenario not being as airtight as initially thought, because we now know that the latch could have been manipulated. The fiancé's narrative having some inconsistencies. Who was present? Who did he call? And the big one? No precedent for a suicide like this in any forensic literature that these experts were aware of. It's just not how people take their own lives. Despite all of this, the official stance of the Philadelphia authorities for years was unchanged. Ellen committed suicide. It's infuriating, frankly, to many who study the case, and it was beyond infuriating to her parents, who simply couldn't accept that explanation. So, they decided to fight with everything they had. Before we move on to the Greenbergs' battle for justice, I want to highlight something important. Part of what likely led police to jump to the suicide conclusion was Ellen's mental health history. She had an anxiety disorder and had been under a lot of stress. Sadly, this wouldn't be the first time that a victim's mental state struggles were used to explain away a suspicious death. Let's talk about that for a moment because it provides a revealing parallel. In Ellen's case, as soon as authorities learned she had been dealing with anxiety and perhaps depression, and that she was even taking anti-anxiety medication, it was like a convenient narrative snap-in. Oh, she must have snapped and killed herself. Never mind the brutality and bizarreness of the scene. They had a pat answer. This, unfortunately, happens in other cases too, where a person's mental health history is used almost as a crutch to support a suicide ruling, even if the death is violently suspicious. One example that comes to mind in this case is Rebecca Zahow. In 2011, it's eerie. Rebecca died just 6 months after Ellen in July 2011. And her case is also extremely controversial. Rebecca was found dead at her boyfriend's mansion in Coronado, California. And get this, she was found hanging from a balcony, completely naked, with her hands tied behind her back and her feet bound. Her mouth was gagged with a t-shirt, and there was an odd cryptic message painted on a door. I know, it sounds like obviously a murder, right? Initially, the police did treat it as suspicious, but then they learned that the night before, Rebecca had been alone in the house when her boyfriend's young son had a terrible accident. He fell and he was gravely injured. Rebecca felt responsible and distraught over the boy's critical condition. Within 2 days, despite the bizarre findings, the San Diego Sheriff's Department concluded that Rebecca Zahow had died by suicide. Their theory was that she was so overcome with guilt, she tied herself up, gagged herself, and hung herself to atone for failing to save the boy. I'm not kidding, that was the official finding. They even did a reenactment video to show how she could have tied her own hands and feet. It was a very controversial conclusion, and Rebecca's family has never accepted it. They pointed out how absurd it is to call that a suicide. In fact, they sued Rebecca's boyfriend's brother, who was on the property at the time, for wrongful death. And a civil jury actually found him responsible for Rebecca's death and awarded the family damages. Yet despite that, the county still refused to change the manner of death on her certificate. It remains suicide, officially. The Zahow family even petitioned the medical examiner in 2022 to reopen and change it to homicide or at least undetermined. But after a review, the medical examiner stuck to the original conclusion in 2023.
That's disgusting. That's part of the justice process. You know
It's so hard to see, like, such an injustice. Such an injustice is just so hard. And like, in Ellen's case or that case or all of the other ones we've looked at, it's like you can see it. You can see clearly, but it's just so awful, and the families deserve that justice.
The fact that the victims aren't ever going to be able to use their voice anymore because they have no voice anymore to be able to defend themselves.
They can't speak for themselves. And so either they have a family that, you know, their fighting pays off, or their fighting doesn't pay off, and either they get justice or they just don't, and it's really sad.
Yeah.
I mentioned Rebecca's story because it does show how authorities can sometimes contort themselves to fit a mental health or emotional narrative. And in her case, they were like, well, she felt guilty about the boy's accident, so that explains it. In Ellen's case, it feels similar. She had anxiety, she was stressed, so maybe she snapped and she did this terrible thing to herself. But mental health struggles do not automatically equate to suicidal action. especially not something as wildly violent and unusual as what happened to Ellen. Yes, depression and anxiety can tragically lead some people to self-harm, but typically in far less gruesome ways. There are other cases too where families have to fight against an initial suicide ruling that they believe is wrong. Sometimes they're able to get it changed and other times they're not. For instance, consider the case of Stephen Smith in South Carolina. Stephen was a 19-year-old who was found dead on a rural road in 2015. His death was initially written off as a hit and run, despite a lot of odd evidence suggesting otherwise. His mother never bought the official story. She suspected her son was murdered, possibly even a hate crime, because Stephen was openly gay in a small town. She pushed and pushed for years, and only in 2021 to 2022, due to public pressure related to the Alex Murdaugh saga, Stephen's case had rumors tying it to the infamous Murdaugh family. State police finally reopened it. And in March 2023, the South Carolina Law Enforcement Division publicly announced that they consider Stephen's death a homicide. That was a huge reversal. After 8 years of the case being closed as an accident, they even exhumed his body for a new autopsy. It's still under investigation, but the key is the truth can eventually come to light. And those death certificate boxes that say accident or suicide can be changed. In Ellen's situation, her parents have been doing exactly that, fighting to change suicide to what they strongly believe it should be, homicide, or at least undetermined. And that fight has been long and arduous. So let's dive into how they took on the system in Ellen's name. So let's talk about a family's fight for answers. Josh and Sandy Greenberg refused to accept the suicide ruling from day one. Can you blame them? They knew their daughter. They knew how much she was looking forward to her wedding, how she was making plans for the future, literally the same day she died. Josh Greenberg, Ellen's father, he's a dentist. He later said something like, "If you came into that apartment and told me that Martians killed my daughter, I'd say, okay, maybe. But suicide? There is no way." In their gut, they felt their daughter had been attacked and that someone was getting away with murder. For years after Ellen's death, the Greenbergs tried to get law enforcement to take a deeper look. They wrote to the Philadelphia police and the district attorney. They even got the Pennsylvania Attorney General's office to take jurisdiction over the case in 2018. This was partly because there were some interesting connections floating around. It turned out that the Philadelphia DA at the time had once worked at the law firm of Sam Goldberg's uncle.
Yes. It is. There's the connection.
There are so many connections. The DA once worked with Sam Goldberg's uncle, the same uncle who picked up the laptop and phone, remember, from the apartment. The same uncle that Sam called as he was trying to break down the door. Also, Pennsylvania's Attorney General in 2018 was Josh Shapiro, who, small world, had personal or political connections to the Goldberg family and to that same uncle, who was a prominent figure in the judicial system. When internet sleuths uncovered those ties, it raised eyebrows about a potential conflict of interest in the case. To avoid any appearance of impropriety, the AG's office in 2022 handed off the case to a different county's district attorney, Chester County. But unfortunately, that did not lead to progress. The Chester County DA basically said their hired independent expert, who oddly had an entomology background, not forensic pathology, saw no proof of homicide, and they closed the case again, calling it inactive. The Greenbergs were livid. Their lawyer pointed out how absurd it was to rely on an expert with no medical degree to decide a case like this. Tired of getting the brush off, the Greenberg family took a bold step. They sued. In October 2019, Josh and Sandy filed a civil lawsuit against the city of Pennsylvania and the medical examiner's office, specifically naming Dr. Marlon Osborne, the pathologist. The goal of the suit was straightforward. They wanted Ellen's manner of death changed to homicide, or at least undetermined, instead of suicide. Their claim, backed by expert reports, was that new evidence showed not all of her wounds could be self-inflicted, and that Dr. Osborne had admitted he changed the ruling under police pressure. Basically, they accused the authorities of getting it wrong and even possibly covering up the truth. In one court filing, they alleged there had been a concealed conspiracy disguising Ellen's homicide as a suicide. Those are strong words. Concealed conspiracy. That shows you how much they distrusted the official version. The city fought back, trying to get the lawsuit dismissed, but in early 2020, a judge ruled the case could proceed. This was a small victory for the Greenbergs. It meant they could enter discovery, which is when you get to gather dispositions, documents, and so forth. And boy, did they gather a lot. Over 10 gigabytes of new evidence, according to their legal team. They worked with outside experts to create 3D computer models of Ellen's wounds using photogrammetry technology, which was not available in 2011. These 3D models help show how some stab wounds simply wouldn't line up with self-inflicted angles. The Greenberg's lawyers deposed officials from the medical examiner's office. One deposition revealed something chilling. One of the staff pathologists, not Osborne but another, testified that in her opinion, Ellen was likely already dead when one of the stab wounds was inflicted, confirming Dr. Ross's finding. So even someone from the ME's own team had doubts about the suicide ruling. Meanwhile, media started picking up the story again. Thanks to the Greenbergs' efforts, the Philadelphia Inquirer ran a front-page investigative piece in March 2019, highlighting all the suspicious aspects. That article is what brought in Wecht and Henry Lee's comments publicly. The case gained traction in the true crime community, being featured on shows like Dr. Oz, CBS, 48 Hours, and numerous podcasts. Essentially, public pressure was building. In 2021, the Greenbergs filed a second lawsuit, this time targeting not just the ME but also city officials, and specifically citing the Philadelphia police and others for a botched investigation. They were leaving no stone unturned. The frustration was evident. It had been a decade since Ellen died, and still her death was officially a suicide. Finally, in late 2022 and into 2023, something shifted. Perhaps sensing the winds, the city of Philadelphia entered into settlement talks with the Greenbergs. By early 2025, 14 years after Ellen's death, a major breakthrough happened. In February 2025, just as one of the civil cases was gearing up for a jury trial, the city agreed to settle. The settlement was essentially a win for Ellen's parents. The Philadelphia Medical Examiner's Office would reopen the investigation into Ellen's death and conduct an independent review of the autopsy and evidence. Even more dramatically, Dr. Marlon Osborne himself, the very doctor who ruled it a suicide, signed an affidavit reversing his stance. In this sworn statement, he said, paraphrasing, that after reviewing all the additional evidence that's come out, it is his professional opinion that Ellen's manner of death should be classified as something other than suicide. Essentially, he now believes the suicide ruling was wrong. Think about how huge that is. The original pathologist basically recanted his official finding. He didn't straight up say it was a homicide in those words, but strongly implied that it belongs in a different category, which realistically would be homicide or at least undetermined. Osborne even mentioned he made this decision after consulting with a specialist, a pediatric neuropathologist, regarding some of the injuries. The settlement also, by the way, included an undisclosed sum of money to the Greenbergs. No amount was made public, but I suspect for the parents, the money was secondary. What they truly wanted was validation and a path toward justice for Ellen. Sandy Greenberg, upon walking out of the courtroom in February 2025, told reporters, "I hope today we made Ellen proud. It's monumental. For 14 years, we've been dealing with this suicide label." You can hear the relief and triumph in that note, monumental. They finally got officialdom to take that horrible, insulting label of suicide off their daughter, at least tentatively.
So do you think now they'll look at a suspect?
I They have not officially named a suspect. They have not officially said that they are looking at anyone in particular, but they are reevaluating the autopsy, the scene, and the findings, and I hope that it is headed in that direction.
Definitely.
Following the February 2025 court appearance, the Philadelphia Medical Examiner's Office publicly stated that it was going to re examine the case with fresh eyes. In fact, in the wake of Osborne's reversal, the current chief medical examiner acknowledged that Ellen's manner of death should indeed be amended to something other than suicide, pending the outcome of their new investigation. As of the time of this recording, they haven't formally issued a new death certificate yet. Osborne's affidavit alone doesn't change it, since he's no longer with the ME's office, but all signs point to Ellen's death being reclassified, most likely to undetermined, while the investigation is ongoing. It's possible, just possible, that they could even go straight to homicide on the certificate, but more likely they'll choose undetermined as a careful middle ground until someone is charged. Speaking of charges, nobody has been arrested or charged in relation to Ellen's death, even now. Sam Goldberg, as I mentioned, was never named as a suspect by police, and I have to say this clearly. In the eyes of the law, Sam is an innocent man. He's moved on with his life over these years, reportedly got married and has a family. He's kept a very low profile and has rarely spoken about Ellen publicly. In fact, he declined to participate in the recent Hulu documentary about the case. But in late 2024, as media attention was ramping up, Sam did release one statement via email to CNN. I want to quote part of it so we hear his side in his words. Quote, "When Ellen took her own life, it left me bewildered. She was a wonderful and kind person who had everything to live for," Sam wrote. "When she died, a part of me died with her. Unimaginably, in the years that have passed, I have had to endure the unimaginable passing of my future wife and the pathetic and despicable attempts to desecrate my reputation and her privacy by creating a narrative that embraces lies, distortions, and falsehoods in order to avoid the truth. Mental illness is very real and has many victims." End quote.
So even after the diagrams they made and all the new technology that came out since then, he still is saying that it's self-unaliving.
He is, even given the new evidence, the things that the Greenbergs have brought forward, instead of saying, "Oh my, let's find who did this to her," he's still saying she had to have done this to herself. He is standing by that initial statement.
I wonder if he was pressured to do this statement after, not one, but I think it was two MEs said that a few of them were done post-mortem.
I mean, I think that the public attention that the case was getting maybe was the pressure that caused him to have to release a statement. Maybe it had something to do with, his job or something like that. But given the new evidence, it seems like he would be saying, let's get to the bottom of this. Let's figure out who did this.
Yeah.
But he's not.
Because at this point, after all the new evidence came out and all the technology is being used and things like that and studying the crime scene, as much as they can anyway, he's looking like a red flag.
Yeah, and I think that, he has been trying to keep a low profile, so maybe that's him just staying out of it, but it's definitely looking like there are some things that were misremembered or misstated that he should clarify.
Yeah.
But he's not. However, his words are powerful. He's asserting that Ellen did take her own life and that he's been unfairly maligned by people, including presumably Ellen's family and supporters, who refuse to accept that. He feels that he's a victim in this too, a victim of losing the woman he loved, and then a victim of slander. It's impossible not to feel some sympathy hearing that, if indeed he is innocent. You can hear the frustration and anger in his voice. He calls the accusations pathetic and despicable. I'm sure from his perspective, this has been a nightmare of being indirectly blamed for something that he insists he didn't do. The Greenbergs' response to that is basically, we're not out to smear anyone. We're out to find the truth. And they believe the truth will show Ellen was killed by someone, maybe someone she knew. And that the suicide theory was the real false narrative. So let's talk about New Hope and where the case stands now. Because here we are, nearly 15 years since that snowy night in 2011. Thanks to Ellen's parents' relentless fight, her case is getting a much-deserved second look. In fact, as I speak, a lot is happening. A new independent review of the evidence is underway. Outside experts are being consulted. There's talk that the Pennsylvania State Police might even reopen a criminal investigation if the death is reclassified. Because then it's officially an unsolved homicide, or at least a suspicious death again. The wheels of justice turn slowly, but they are finally turning here. Moreover, Ellen's story is reaching a national audience. A documentary series titled Death in Apartment 603, What Happened to Ellen Greenberg, just premiered on Hulu in late September 2025. Apartment 603 was Ellen and Sam's unit number, by the way. This docuseries was produced by ABC News and even has some star power behind it. The actress Dakota Fanning is an executive producer, interestingly enough. I watched it, and it's deeply moving and infuriating in equal measure. It lays out a lot of what we discussed, the autopsy findings, the inconsistencies, the legal battle. The fact that a big platform like Hulu is airing it means thousands more people are learning about Ellen's case, which in turn puts pressure on the authorities to do something. There's a kind of crowdsourced justice that often happens these days. When enough people know and care, it's harder for officials to quietly sweep things under the rug. Ellen's parents, now in their 60s, have spent their life savings and then some on this fight. They say they'll keep going until they get justice or they can't fight anymore. Their strength is both heartbreaking and inspiring. They've said that they can't even bring themselves to visit Ellen's grave because seeing that headstone with 1983 to 2011 and knowing it's labeled suicide in the records just breaks them. Think about that. They haven't even had closure enough to properly mourn at her grave because to them the story's not over. They can't rest, and neither in a sense can Ellen. So what might justice look like ideally? At minimum, the Greenbergs want the record corrected. That Ellen's death certificate not bear what they call the scarlet letter of suicide. It looks like they're achieving that. The suicide finding is in the process of being overturned officially. But beyond that, they of course want accountability. That means figuring out who was responsible for Ellen's death and holding them accountable in a court of law. If indeed it was a homicide, there is a person or persons out there who literally got away with murder since 2011. Could it have been a stranger? Possibly, but unlikely given no evidence of forced entry. Could it have been someone Ellen knew and trusted enough to let in, or someone who had a key? That question hangs heavy. The only person we know had a key and was there that day was Sam. If not him, then who? That's the uncomfortable elephant in the room.
There was also no one else on the cameras.
No one else seen on camera or by any witnesses entering the apartment.
And it's also pretty shady too, like thinking about, speaking of the camera and things like that. In his statement, his original statement was, he kept saying that people were there with him. Or he was on the phone with someone when he actually did, when he knocked the door down, but that wasn't true at all.
Yeah, he said the security guard was there when he broke down the door, but the security guard said he was not.
And then the fact that he was on the phone with his family when that happened too, and that was, he was trying to make a point that he had proof, but he didn't.
Yeah.
So he was trying to make it sound good, but really, I don't know, it's just raising a lot of red flags, in multiple, scenarios that he said that. And he lied about it.
So many questions. So many questions, for sure. And I think that's how Ellen's family feels. There's so many questions. There's too many questions.
And she lived on the 6th floor, right? Of this apartment complex. So it's not even a fact of someone stuck through a window. you know, because that would be nearly impossible, or someone would see that, you know, that's
Right.
6 stories up. So, yeah, that's very interesting. But also, the fact that the manager of the hotel, or the manager of the apartment complexes said that, you know, if you close it too hard, it can swing shut, and that can easily be manipulated.
Yeah.
Even on the inside. You know, I think we were talking about it earlier, where if someone was on the inside, they could have locked it and just pulled it to make it look like it was damaged.
Yeah.
You know, and no one really knows if
And
you
I
actually
mean,
kicked it in.
sometimes, like, if you can crack the door a little bit, you can, like, push it. Like, you can fit your hand in there and push
Yeah.
it off. So, like, there are ways that it could have been manipulated, and it shouldn't have been the end all be all that the latch was on.
No, especially since, yeah, they said it was easily manipulated. You can slam that door really hard, and if it's loose, it swings shut. But at
Right.
the same time, like I said, on the inside, someone can lock it and be like, pull it open and rip it off the wall. That's
Yeah.
not hard to do.
I mean, there's also that possible scenario floating around that it could have been ripped off the wall before he ever left for the gym.
Yeah.
Like, it could have been already latched and pulled.
But the fact that he was hiding, or lying, saying that however many people witnessed him breaking the door down, no one actually witnessed that.
Yeah.
So we really don't know how the latch got ripped open.
Exactly. And that's like one of the big questions that has floated around for years and that her family has wondered.
Yeah, and it's a big question because that's the one thing that he is the most adamant about. Like, no, security guard was with me. I was on the phone with family when this happened. Like, he's trying to have all these alibis about this door.
And police have stated, like, that was the one thing that kind of led them towards that conclusion, is that it was latched, so there was no one else in there, supposedly. So, yeah, it's a big deal that it was taken that much into consideration when it could not even be true.
And also the fact that he was on the phone with the uncle who was the, you know, high up in the defense attorney or judge or whatever he was. Like, it's very interesting because they would know a lot about evidence and things like that if you look at it from that perspective. I'm not saying that
it's an interesting phone call to make, for sure.
Yeah, like to him.
To speculate about, for sure.
Yeah. So that's it just raises a lot more questions, like with all the technology and all the new evidence coming out. It's almost like, I think I read a lot of comments too after the Hulu docu-series came out, was like, how is this not plain for everybody to see right now, you know?
Yeah. I mean,
it's innocent until proven guilty, right?
Innocent until proven guilty, and he's never been charged or, you know, considered a suspect, so no one has. It's worth noting, though, in fairness, that we don't truly have a smoking gun pointing to a specific perp. We have a mountain of evidence that screams it wasn't suicide, which usually, by elimination, implies homicide. But we don't have direct evidence of anyone, no fingerprints, no DNA from a mystery assailant. Remember that they didn't collect it, and it was a shared apartment, so DNA would be hard to interpret anyways. But based on the way that they initially ruled the scene, they didn't collect those things. So any prosecution, if it ever happens, would likely be circumstantial. Not impossible. Lots of cases go to trial on that circumstantial evidence, but definitely challenging, especially so many years later. However, we've seen cold cases solved after decades with even less to go on. Once the will is there to solve them, sometimes relationships change, people talk, new witnesses emerge, or someone's conscience leads them to confess or cooperate. Maybe someone knows something about Ellen's death and they haven't revealed it. The renewed attention might encourage them to finally speak up. One way or another, Ellen's story is not over. Her parents have a saying, "Justice for Ellen." It's on the Facebook page they run, on the petitions that thousands have signed, on the t-shirts that supporters wear. And it's not just about changing a piece of paper. It's about truth. They want to truly know what happened to their daughter in that apartment. And as I wrap up this episode, I keep thinking about Ellen and her final moments. If she was under attack, what terror and confusion she must have felt. Perhaps at the hands of someone she loved. If by some chance it was self-inflicted, I always try to keep an open mind, but it's so hard to believe. What kind of mental anguish would drive a person to such a violent end? Either scenario is profoundly tragic. But what adds to the tragedy is the treatment of her case afterward. The doubts ignored, the evidence lost, the years of stonewalling her grieving family. That is a tragedy we can fix, and it seems like we finally are. Ellen Greenberg's case forces us to confront some uncomfortable truths about the world. That sometimes the truth can be bent or buried, and it's up to determined people to dig it back up. That mental health stigma can cloud judgment in investigations. That even a locked door isn't an ironclad mystery. There's always more to the story. Picture a young Ellen, smiling in photos, a vibrant teacher who loved kids and was about to get married, juxtaposed with the gruesome crime scene photos of her kitchen. It's a jarring contrast that has kept me up at night. I found myself thinking, what really happened in apartment 603, and will we ever know for sure? For Ellen's parents, they have a mantra. We will never stop fighting for the truth. And I believe them. They've shown what a family's love combined with sheer determination can accomplish. They've moved mountains that everyone told them could not be moved. In a way, Ellen's case is a story of parents' love as much as it is a story of a possible murder. It's about not letting your child be forgotten or mislabeled by a system that found it easier to close a case than to seek justice. I am hopeful that in the coming months or years, I'll be able to update this story with a clear resolution. Perhaps a new ruling of homicide and even an arrest. If and when that happens, I will probably break down in tears of sorrow and gratitude. Sorrow that Ellen lost her life in such a terrible way, but gratitude that the truth finally prevailed. Thank you for joining me on this deep dive into Ellen Greenberg's case. It's not an easy story to hear, I know. If you found yourself outraged or heartbroken, you're not alone. Countless people have been moved by Ellen's story and have joined the call for justice. If you want to support the Greenbergs' fight, there are petitions and websites. Just search for Ellen Greenberg, where you can lend your voice. In the end, what I take away from this case as a reminder is to never stop asking questions. If something doesn't sit right, dig deeper. The truth might be hiding, but it's still there, and it's worth fighting for. Ellen Greenberg's story isn't just a true crime mystery. It's a testament to a family's love and the pursuit of truth against all odds. I sincerely hope that one day very soon we'll be talking about this case in the past tense, as in it's finally solved. Until then, we keep Ellen's name alive, we keep sharing her story, and we keep that hope. Justice for Ellen, and may it be closer than ever.